Now that we understand communication between a parent and child component, we're going to go ahead and talk about another method for handling communication between components, whether they be parent-child or whether they be sibling components, and a way to kind of decouple components one from another. When we have a parent-child component situation like we had in the last screencast, and we talk about the different ways that communication can happen using notification handlers, and the requirement that the parent have the notification handler and that notification handler be passed down through props to the child component, we run into an issue that these components become tightly coupled one to another, and we want to avoid that. So one way of removing this coupling and making these components operate independently one from another without being tightly coupled is to use a pattern, a programming pattern. And there are a lot of programming patterns out there, and two of them that I would like you to learn about, and I want you to spend some time on your own learning about these, is the observer pattern. And this geeksforgeeks.org/observer patterns set 1 introduction is a good article that talks directly about the observer pattern by itself. It helps you understand the observer pattern and provides a little bit of code and some explanation as to how that works. Then I want you to understand the publisher subscriber pattern. And this one from Microsoft's website is a really good one as well, that talks about how the PubSub or publisher subscriber pattern works. And it talks specifically about this publisher subscriber model or paradigm that we use as a pattern inside of software development. The next one I want you to read is this medium.com easy to read difference between PubSub pattern and observable pattern. This one is a really good read. It only takes about 2 minutes, and it really is a good one because it talks about both the observer design pattern as well as the publish subscribe design pattern, and kind of compares them both to each other really quickly. It's a really light read. Maybe start with this one, and then if you don't quite grasp the concepts of the observer and the publisher subscriber, then go read these more in-depth ones. But let's start out with just kind of an overview so we understand what's happening here. In the observer pattern, we have some observers, and in this case they use a dating website as an example. It's actually a pretty good example in order to help you understand it. And it's that we have a woman that is looking for someone, or men that is also looking for a woman in this dating website. And in this example that they use, the men provide their phone numbers, and then when the woman wants to contact any of the men, she will then call their number in order to talk to them, but they are all observing her. Now, that's a kind of a good way to remember it. Now, in the publisher subscriber pattern, it's a little bit different. It's a little more complex, and it's a little bit more disconnected and not so dependent. The observer pattern is kind of what we used when we created the parent-child with the notification handler. So this is kind of that pattern right there, is this observer design pattern or observer design pattern. And that's what we just used in the last tutorial when we created the notification handler. Now with that, we still have the observers are still bound to the event, and that is that they have to provide a phone number to this particular event, so that way when it happens, this event can then call them and let them know. Also in this pattern, because each observer is providing a notification handler, or in the example a phone number for the girl to call, we have these two that are tightly bound one to another because the observer has to provide a notification handler to the event creator in order for that event creator to then notify them. And with that, the number of observers that are listening for this event, they're going to have their own notification handlers that are going to have to be passed to this event creator. In that situation, we end up with a props object coming into our component, if we think back to our components, that would have to take in multiple props for each different observer. And if each of those different observers have a different notification handler or a different way that they want to be notified, like maybe this guy uses a phone number, this guy uses an ancient pager, and this guy uses Facebook, well, those notifications are going to be a little bit different coming from the event creator, which means that the event creator has to know how to call a phone, it has to know how to call a pager, and it needs to know how to type something in Facebook. With that, we run into the fact that these become tightly coupled. And we don't want them to be tightly coupled. We want the event creator to simply be able to say, hey, something happened, and then those who are interested should be notified about that event without the event creator needing to understand or know how to contact each of these. And that's where the publish subscribe design pattern comes in, is we have this middle tier right here where the publisher has an event that they can call, and they can publish more than one event. Instead of just, I'm ready for a date, it can be, hey, I would like to talk on the phone, and now I'm ready for a date. So we would have two different event types that this particular publisher could publish, and then each of these subscribers could then create their own way of handling when an event happens. And they simply subscribe to the event instead of passing their information directly to the event creator. And so we create kind of this separation of concerns. An event creator or a publisher can create multiple different kinds of events, and all it cares about is that it is going to say that this event is happening, and it doesn't care really who subscribes to that event, but if they are interested in that event and they have subscribed, they will then be notified that this event happened. And the data transfer is really from the event creator to the subscriber without the publisher needing to know how each subscriber is going to be notified. In other words, how they're notified is abstracted from the publisher actually letting everyone know that an event happened. And then each of these subscriptions would then have a way of notifying these subscribers that this event is about to happen. So a little bit more complex than the observer pattern that we've used, but this is the pattern that we want to use inside of our application in order to decouple our components one from another. There are a few good libraries out there that we can use. There is the PubSub.js. This is a really popular library that we can use that is supported inside of NPM. And it's a really good library that we can use. Another one is the Event Emitter 3. So it tells you that it shows you the support it has across all browsers. It's also an NPM package, or can be used inside of NPM, which is really good for our application. Or it can be pulled directly from a CDN and used in the browser directly. And then another one is React.js, a reactive extensions library for JavaScript that does a similar PubSub kind of thing, using that observable pattern and the publish subscribe. The one that we are going to be using, the one that I picked, is going to be this PubSub.js, and we're going to be using that in the next video to actually decouple our to-do item create component from our app.js component and create a little bit of separation or abstraction between those two so that they are not tightly coupled through the props object.